Um, we now have our final presenter, Yianni. We've got Dr. Yianni Cartledge, who is a recent PhD graduate and lecturer in Greek studies at Flinders University and adjunct lecturer at Tabor College. Yianni's PhD thesis, conferred in March 2024, explored the migration of Greek Aegean islanders to the UK and Australia during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Yianni's research interests include migration and the migrant experience, diaspora studies, Mediterranean histories, particularly the British and Ottoman empires, religious history, and the history of modern Greece. Yianni is also the assistant editor of the Journal of Imperial and Commonwealth History. I'm really excited for your presentation because a lot of your research interests overlap with mine. So handing the time over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm just going to try share my slides. I'll be 1 second. One second, guys. Sorry. Just checking. Is that look okay? Awesome. Yeah. Morning, everyone. Thanks to Michelle for chairing this session and organizing the event, and to Stacey, Lee, and Ben for the fascinating presentations. I'm Yianni, and I'm going to be talking about the establishment of the Greek community in Utah, especially about the ways the Greek community interacted with Mormonism, particularly focusing on between 1870 and 1940. This is a bit of a developing paper. I'm working on this with my colleague, Dr. Brenton Griffin, who also presented at this conference. So yeah, there are a lot of questions still around this for us that we are exploring, and this is probably a good forum as well to get people's feedback and ideas going forward with this paper. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm giving this presentation from the lands of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with the country, and acknowledge their heritage and beliefs, and their elders past, present, and emerging. But I would also like to acknowledge all the Indigenous peoples on the lands that we're all meeting today, guys. In 1907, the Deseret Evening News published an extensive article titled "The Alien Colonies of Cosmopolitan Salt Lake." The author spent the first half of the article deconstructing the Greek community of Utah, noting that Greeks are different. Salt Lake has long been familiar with its Chinatown, and all foreign settlements have come to be thought of as places where a dozen families live in a house, and filth and squalor stand as emblematic of the civilization. Not so is it, however, among the Greeks. Mr. Stathakos, who was giving the author a tour of the Greek town, takes you to an elaborately furnished home to talk to you, then asks you to join him for a cigar in one of the Greek coffee houses. This almost romanticist kind of Philhellenic view of the Greeks was furthered in this article, noting that they are not lawbreakers, that there are 4,000 Greeks in Utah, that the Greek colony is 2 years old, and that 165 Greeks are naturalized citizens. Additionally, the Deseret Evening News went on to provide an overview of the Greek settlement in Utah, which focused on the laboring nature of the community, stating that it was only 5 years ago that the first Greeks set foot in Utah, and this party consisted of a laboring gang of 50 men employed on the Union Pacific Railroad. After that came other groups to labor in the smelters, the mines, and on the railroads. There are now 4,000 in the state and 2,500 in Idaho. This is reminiscent of other Greek diasporas during the same era, such as those who went to places such as Port Pirie here in South Australia to work at the BHP smelters. Furthermore, in taking an intrigue to the religion of the community, Deseret Evening News examined the Greek Orthodox Church in Utah, noting it as the central point in a thriving Greek precinct. So it is the Greek Church, and he, Stathakos, the tour guide for this author, swells with pride in pointing out that of all the foreign colonies, his is the only one here to have a church. a priest and an organized religion, and a $14,000 building, entirely paid for out of voluntary contributions from the Greek laborers in the smelters and on the railroads. So from 2nd to 6th West Streets and from 2nd South to 6th South is the Greek Quarter. There are 1,000 Greeks in the neighborhood, and most of them live in comfortable homes. They have one rather ambitious commercial concern, the Olympia Candy Company on Main Street, and 12 grocery stores, 10 saloons, 6 bakeries, 3 candy stores, 20 shoe shine shops, 6 coffee houses, and 15 restaurants. So this was quite a thriving, bustling community in the early 20th century. So Nicholas P. Stathakos, who acted as the author's community tour guide, was the vice president and later president of the Greek community of Utah. He was instrumental in founding the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Salt Lake City in 1905. This was the state's first, and in the Deseret Evening News, it was further noted that all the Greeks here lived near the church, and this neighborhood in particular. There was a Canaris Society, which sent funds to help build the Greek Navy, and the Pan-Hellenic Philanthropic Society, which sent $2,000 to the General San Francisco Relief Funds. Next week, the first issue of the Ergates, a Greek newspaper, was to be published, and it was ready on the press pretty much. So as most of you know, here, Mormon pioneers arrived in what would be Salt Lake City in around 1847. The first Greeks arrived in Utah, though, in between the 1870s and 1890s. Most were moving westward from Chicago, where a larger Greek community existed. However, the majority came after Utah's statehood from 1896. Cretans and Peloponnesians in particular, so that's Greeks from Crete and from the Peloponnese region, they chain migrated to Utah, which was pretty much just them following their compatriots en masse. Railroad lines were a source of employment at first, and later so were mines, smelters, and construction. And by 1902, Greeks were also being used as strike breakers in railroad yards, solidifying their integral role in Utah's working class. Here you can see early 20th century Greek railroad workers in Utah as well. In 1905, a committee of Utah Greeks formed with the aim of building the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church on 4th South, which swiftly eventuated. There was a precinct that was described in the papers known as Greektown, which was formed around the church, which was between 2nd, 3rd, and 4th South, and between 1st and 6th West. And it was an economic and social hub with Greek businesses, cafes, and eateries. The 1910 census counted 4,062 Greeks in Utah, which is quite a staggering number given the remoteness and sociocultural context of the state. Between 1923 and 1925, Utah's Greeks built a new Holy Trinity Church on the corner of 3rd South and 2nd West, which can be seen here. And this replaced the old Holy Trinity, and the church stands to this day as well. So the question of Greeks in Utah is notably tied to the discussion of specifically Cretans in Utah, so Greeks from the large island of Crete. The large Cretan community itself was enabled during this period by what was called the Cretan State, an autonomous state that the island was at this point, and this lasted between 1898 and 1913. Additionally, Cretans before this point were Ottoman citizens, and after this point, Greek citizens. The work of Helen Papanikolaou documented the history of Utah's Greeks and the Cretan community, and Alexander Belinas has also followed this line of inquiry. However, I won't retrace the entire historiography right now, but he has set the groundwork for this study. Much work has also been done on padrones, such as the character of Leonidas Skleris. These were Greek labor employers who enabled both chain migration and continued migration to the state. However, they also supported exploitative practices and were imbued with negative connotations. Much of this exploitation contributed to the 1912 Bingham strike in Utah, led by the Cretans, as well as the nearby 1914 Ludlow massacre in Colorado, where Cretan migrant and union leader Louis Ticas was killed. Additionally, at the same time in Europe, the great powers were discussing what was called the Eastern Question. This is the question of what to do with the eventual breakup of the Ottoman Empire. A component of this was the Cretan question, which was what to do with the Ottoman possession of Crete. There was a debate in the UK House of Commons that echoed this, where on the 2nd of March 1897, members discussed the British government's policy regarding autonomy for Crete, aiming to end Turkish authority on the island. Sorry, guys. Sir William Harcourt criticised the government at the time, highlighting the failures of previous reforms and expressing concerns about the effectiveness of proposed autonomy after a Greek revolt occurred on Crete in 1897. The debate also addressed the involvement of Greek forces in Crete and the challenges of maintaining order amidst ongoing conflicts. The autonomy of the island of Crete was a unique factor in the story of Utah's Greek community. Crete itself experienced the turbulent 1890s, leading to becoming the autonomous Cretan State, which lasted from 1898 to 1913. It essentially was triggered by the Cretan Revolt, which caused the subsequent Greco-Turkish War in 1897. So following this, multiple European powers, notably the UK, France, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Russia, divided Crete into administrative zones before formally evicting all remaining Ottoman garrisons and forming the Cretan State. This event essentially reinforced the unique Cretan identity, which was separate from the Greek identity at the time. So the two separate identities even remained separate after the Cretan State joined Greece in 1913. And the distinction between Cretans and Greeks during this period is really significant. Cretans had been Ottoman citizens and then autonomous, having a fiercely independent identity with their own dialect and also a significant Muslim population. They also experienced some isolation from the rest of Greece due to their island nature, and this set them apart from the mainland Greeks who had been part of the original Greek state borders since the 1820s and had subscribed to the modern Greek identity. So on the 10th of December 1915, Utah's newspaper, The Sun, published an article titled Foreign Additions to Population, 2,422 Greeks lead in number, in which the Cretans were counted separately from Greeks at this point. It was stated that there were 3,387 foreigners that came to Utah during 1914, and 965 left the state. Of those that came to Utah, there were 787 Greeks, and then in comparison, there were 99 Cretans and Slavs who were lumped together in their own category. At the same time, of those that left, there were 453 Greeks that left and 99 Cretans and Slavs. And sorry, that first number I should have said was 237 Cretans and Slavs. Regardless of this highlighted the independent identity of the Cretans, as well as the significance of the Cretan component in Utah's Greek community. So the question remains, how did this vibrant Greek Orthodox community interact with Mormon society? As much has already been said on the Greek community itself in wider literature, the importance of this study is the examination of Greek members of the LDS Church. Helen Papanikolaou had in fact discussed some examples previously of third-generation Greek Mormons in Utah who held a dualistic identity. There also are many existing memoirs that have also been painted in this picture as well. So when examining LDS church census data, we have found that between 1920 and 1940, there are at least 135 families of Greek origin that were members of the LDS Church in Utah, and this totaled 641 church members of Greek origin. For comparison, both the 1910 and 1940 censuses counted just above 4,000 residents of Utah of Greek heritage, which, if taken as a guide, equates to about a quarter or a fourth of Utah's Greek Mormons, Greeks being Mormons, sorry. with the rest presumably remaining Greek Orthodox. However, there is good reason to believe that the actual number of Greeks in Utah was higher than the census numbers at this time, such as some of the practices of ship jumping and some of these things as well. And this shows that the Mormon Greeks probably made up slightly under a quarter of Utah's Greek population. Additionally, the majority of Greeks that converted to Mormonism in Utah did not marry other Greeks, with at least 77% or 104 families being in a mixed Greek, non-Greek marriage. This is a unique but understandable statistic, as Greeks have generally been noted for their endogamy within the diaspora. So this would make sense for those that left those who left the Orthodox Church often did so via marriage. Some Greeks also married into key established Mormon families, often with links to pioneers as well. So one example was a man named Angel Thomas Katsianis, or Angelos Thomas Katsianis. He was born in 1890 in Arcadia in Greece. He married a lady called Ada Lucinda Bingham. She was the daughter of Elisha Erastus Bingham, who was the son of a pioneer named Sanford Bingham and grandson of pioneer Erastus Bingham Sr. The Binghams joined the LDS Church in 1833 and moved west from New England. Erastus Bingham himself was made a captain of 100 during this move. Angel and Ada had 11 children, and most of their descendants are still part of the LDS Church today. Similarly, there was a man called Chris Kondos, who was born in 1888 in Dorida in Greece, who married Lavina Erickson, and they had 9 children. Lavina was the granddaughter of a pioneer herself named William MacDonald. And a third example here is Tom George Georges, born in 1896 in Thessaly in Greece, who had married Mary Alice Hawkins, the granddaughter of Thomas Sunderland Hawkins. Thomas Sunderland Hawkins was the first man sent to prison for plural marriage. So the Anglicization of names, or the practice of often associated with migrants entering new countries, especially those utilizing different alphabets, such as the Greeks, was also a common feature for those that joined the LDS Church. Often this was noted as a path of least resistance, as someone I interviewed once had stated. It was a way of blending and fitting into Anglophone society. It aided the integration and assimilation process, especially those with considered more wordy names. It was also a way of masking a migrant heritage in a society that was prone towards supporting a monoculture and homogeneity. Essentially, Anglicization of names was not always the migrant's choice, as it could have been done by border officers. However, it was often maintained by the migrant due to the ease it provided. In all, over 94% of Greek Mormons either fully or partially anglicized their names, and only just over 5% kept their Greek names in full. This is a very high statistic, especially comparing to wider Greek populations, and in comparison with other nations and contexts. It would be interesting once we get the statistics to compare this to those that didn't convert to Mormonism, their levels of Anglicization. And this is just an interesting kind of line of inquiry we're following about that, I guess, gives us a bit more of a picture about the integration into society. When we're talking about Anglicization, some of the examples we've found in the data include a man called Harry George Greaves, who was born in Greece. Probably his name was something along the lines of Charilaos or Charalambos Georgios Grivas. We also see examples of the Mavros surname, a very common Greek surname, becoming Moore and Morris. And when we're talking about partially anglicized, we still have some retainment of the Greek name there, such as the name Pappus. However, Pappus is almost always shortened from another name. Pappus means priest, so usually it's a longer name, such as Papayannis, Priest John, or something like that. We also see names like Antoniou, common Greek surnames, patronymic surnames, becoming names like Antone, still retaining part of the name, but maybe in a more easier to pronounce way, as well as a man called Yorgos Kondos, becoming George Kondos, a little bit easier, a little bit more, a name that is a bit more less imposing when to read. The other noteworthy statistic we found thus far is the location of birth or origin of Greek Mormons. Firstly, it should be noted that these statistics are possibly skewed, as 230 people did not specify their location of where they were born in Greece. They just stated Greece. So we don't really have data from where those particular people are from. Secondly, one thing you may notice is that despite the very large Cretan community, the majority of Greek Mormons actually originated on the mainland, with the Peloponnese region standing out. This makes sense, as the Peloponnese was the second largest place of origin of the wider Greek community in Utah, but also due to the independent Cretan identity, perhaps Cretans were more likely to retain and maintain their orthodoxy, as well as marry within the Greek community. You also notice that Greeks from the Ottoman Empire, who did not arrive with Greek nationality as such, were also a significant community. And despite Cretans having more people, the Ottoman Greeks actually had more families in the LDS Church. For comparison, there was also a large Armenian presence from the Ottoman Empire at the same time, with many also converting to Mormonism, which would make an interesting comparative study down the track. So there also is a flip side to this project that we are hoping to explore. So while the Greek community in Utah was growing and interacting and in many ways integrating with Mormonism, simultaneously the Mormon community in Greece was growing and developing. For instance, in the mid-1880s, Apostle Francis Lyman toured the Holy Land, following the steps of Orson Hyde almost 40 years earlier. And on his travels, Lyman also investigated other proselytizing opportunities in the Mediterranean, and he ended up in Greece. Though there are a few records from his visit, it was not until over 2 decades later that the Athenian-born Rigas Bofantis requested baptism from the church's mission president in the Ottoman Empire. This spelled the beginnings of the LDS community of Greece, which now exists in 2 congregations and around 800 members in 2022. And similarly in Cyprus, there are 5 congregations and about 600 members, as well as 3 family history centers. Both the Greek and Cypriot missions actually fall under the jurisdiction of the church in Bulgaria at this point in time. So this is that flip side to the project, which we're taking this kind of comparative study, is while there was a Greek community in Utah integrating into Mormon society, at the same time there was a growing Mormon community in Greece and the Greek-speaking world that was slowly developing alongside it. Eventually, we hope to make some links between these 2 particular kind of different societies that are developing. But yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate you tuning in and looking forward to any ideas and feedback going forward with this project.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I definitely have questions. Brilliant. Well, we've got about 50-ish minutes for Q&A. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat, or just put a note in the chat that you have a question you'd like to ask. But as people can have a moment to pull their thoughts together and form some questions, I'll go ahead and start. Let me decide who I want to start with. Yianni, since we just had yours, I'm going to start with some questions for you. Really great presentation, really great themes, some of which definitely overlap with similar research that I've done on Scandinavians in community in Utah. So I guess my first question is, at the sort of the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned this article, which amongst sort of like, they have like almost like several things that they mention that kind of always talk about this is why the Greek community is civilized. And one of them is the number of naturalized citizenships. And that's something that in my own work on Scandinavians, I've been very interested in, but kind of struggled to put words to, is the importance of citizenship for these immigrant communities, while also balancing negotiating their cultural identity. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on the importance of US citizenship while also negotiating cultural identity in the Greek community in Utah.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Great question. First, you mentioned Scandinavians, which is really interesting because a lot of those mixed non-Greek, non-Greek marriages a huge portion of them were to Scandinavian
Oh, interesting.
immigrants, which is an interesting link there. Um, I guess two kind of non-English speaking communities within the church that were marrying together. So that could be something to explore down the track, I guess. But yeah, I guess citizenship was, I guess, a goal for Greek migrants. If we're comparing them to other case studies that we've looked at in the past. However, yeah, it is a small portion that actually were it naturalized. It was, only I think less than 200 out of the 4,000 in the community actually had that citizenship. Um, but it definitely was, uh, especially one those that I think became part of the Mormon Church. It was important for them to have that citizenship because they were planning to remain long term in the state. Probably a lot good portion of them never returned to Greece. Whereas probably the transient kind of laborers, it wasn't quite a priority in that sense. They were probably moving on to other states, maybe to other countries. Um, my own family history of Greek migrants is that they moved through various different countries, laboring and working in different places. So maybe, yeah, citizenship probably became more sought after, or naturalization, actually, we should say, once they'd married, started having families, um, in that sense. Yeah, and especially for their children who then would have been born most likely as US citizens in that case as well. But yeah, it is interesting as well, the kind of Greeks being portrayed as the civilized nature as well. I think that's an interesting point because it links to that kind of 19th century ideal around Greek heritage in the West and things like that as well. So there was probably possibly an easier path towards citizenship than maybe other migrant communities might have had at the time. So yeah.
Thank you. I'll definitely talk to you later about Scandinavian Greek
Yeah,
relationships.
100%.
um,
Yeah.
got a question from James in the chat. He says, I'd be interested in interactions between Greek Orthodox Greek Uthans and Latter-day Saint Greek Uthans. What evidence can we see of continued socializing? Are Latter-day Saints ever active in Greek community organizations?
Thanks, James. Great questions. So I only really have an answer to the first part of your question, and that comes through sort of memoirs that we've kind of looked at. We haven't delved too deeply into a lot of these memoirs yet, but there are a lot of LDS church members that are Greek origin that were born into the church in that sense, that that have kind of maintained a Greek identity and a Greek link with the wider community, and kind of said that they had their kind of feet in two different societies at that time. However, I haven't actually seen anything about Mormon Greeks uh, maintaining kind of active roles in Greek community organizations just yet. I'm sure there might be examples there, but yeah, we haven't quite seen those sort of links. There also is a sense of if a Greek did leave the Orthodox Church, how was their standing then within Orthodox society, which is an idea we want to explore a bit deeper. Did that mean that they were now removed or not as welcomed, or did they still maintain their Greek identity? There's an interesting case here in my city, Adelaide, where there is a large Protestant Greek community that is quite separate and distinct from the Greek Orthodox community at the same time, with some interactions in kind of, celebrations and things and extended family, but not quite as much in each other's actual organizations. So yeah, but yeah, very interesting idea, and yeah, good question for us as we're moving forward with this. So yeah, thanks.